Are you neurodivergent, and do you struggle with misophonia, that aversion to certain human noises? I know I do. From an early age, I remember sitting in classrooms and there would be somebody behind me who had a cold or a flu and they had nasal drip. And they would sniff repetitively, sniffing their nasal drip back up into their nasal passage until inevitably again it would slide back down and they would sniff. And they would do it unconsciously. They had no awareness whatsoever that this was happening. It was all going on as like a instinctive, reflexive behavior. And I would sit there and think, get a dang tissue, blow your nose, solve the problem. You can only keep sniffing so much, and it's not going to make much of a difference if you don't blow your nose. But the people, bless them, were not aware that that was even going on. It was an unconscious process. And it would have just been easier if I turned around and said, hey, do you want a tissue? And sometimes I do, these days, I do go, hey, do you want a tissue? And the person will be like, oh, no, I'm fine. And I'm like, no, you are not. You have been sniffing compulsively for the past hour. And sometimes they'll be aware of it, or they'll get the hidden signal and they'll realize, oh, yes, I'm maybe making an annoying noise. And then they'll accept the offer. I have tried not to do that, to say anything, because I don't want to make that person self-conscious and annoy them. And because if it's seen as a corrective, or a complaint, that person is going to internalize that as I'm a picky or annoying person, and they might not like me. It'll color their image of me in a negative light. At the same time, it's driving me up the wall and making me sometimes absolutely livid, and I'll have to plug my ear with my thumb. And even now in classrooms, I have to use loop earbuds and block, half of my hearing just so I won't hear them. And then the person will want to talk to me, and I'm like, okay, I have to take the earbud out. And it would be easier by far to just let people know that I have this, but at the end of the day, it would mean that I'd often have to issue correctives of some sort, or at least tell that person, because people, again, aren't conscious of it. Other noises that annoy me is when somebody in a conversation goes, mm, and repetitively makes a noise of acknowledgement. Nothing inherently wrong with that noise. It's just there, and they're often doing it as a sign of acknowledgement, but for some reason that'll grind on my nerves. Eating is another big one. Sitting at the dinner table as a family when I was growing up was horrible because everybody would be smacking their chops and chewing a little bit with their mouth open and slurping, and it would drive me bonkers until I complained so consistently I was allowed to go sit at a different table, which was instant relief. I can be in company eating out and it will start happening and I'll be like, oh gosh, could you just not, please? When I lived in China briefly, slurping was very normalized. You'd be in a noodle joint and people would be doing it left, right, center. And it's hard because you don't want that person to feel like you're criticizing them or judging them or complaining when they're just functioning as a human being. They can't understand, unless they themselves have misophonia, how acutely frustrating those noises can be and triggering. And so it's hard because in a neurotypical non-misophonia standpoint, you're just being picky. You're just agitating about nothing. And for them, their sensory perception is completely different. And it's hard to kind of explain unless they subjectively understand why it's annoying. One thing I like to say to people is, hey, can I give you a wet willy? How would that feel? You wouldn't like that feeling of something wet in your ear. It would really make you uncomfortable. That is what misophonia or sensory overwhelm or discomfort is like. It's intrusive, invasive, uncomfortable, frustrating, even it drives you to the point of rage sometimes. And I think when I give that analogy, people can understand it. People who don't have misophonia or sensory differences that cause them to get overloaded. And they can be like, oh yeah, that kind of twigs. Because so far as they know, they haven't had that experience or anything comparable. So how can they even start making sense of it until they've had an example as like obvious as that? Have you struggled with misophonia or any kind of sensory differences that cause you to get overloaded? I would love to hear all about your experiences.